So I've been officially covering esports, or specifically League of Legends, for almost about 4 years now. I started in 2017. Now it's 2021. And with this said, and I'm not saying that I'm the arbiter of, truth when it comes to esports journalism and whatnot. But I think there comes a question, especially for younger people, of if they should get within this space and also if they should go all in on it. And I think, first of all, the question of how do I become an esports journalist? I think it's a little bit ambiguous because, first of all, you're talking to the wrong fucking guy. Like, first of all, I don't even declare myself as a journalist. One, because I think when you do declare yourself as a journalist, you have to uphold this bastion of integrity, strong morals, and adherence to the ethics of, the entire community that you're involved within. And on top of that, you have to be very diligent as well too, right? So a lot of that I can cover myself, and I can adhere to a strong sense of morality, which I do have myself, in integrity, but and ethics as well too. Although ethics changes with the community itself, and so you have to find that balance as you are a journalist. And then, of course, diligence is another key factor, which I personally don't have because it's just not my full-time job, and I don't think I can commit enough time to be diligent to be considered a journalist. That's why I don't consider myself a journalist. But now, I know there are a lot of other journalists that have gone all in on esports, right? You look at what Darius back in the day, right? The founder of Shot Caller, right? You have Parks over at Invent Global. I think now he's at Upcomer or some shit. Ashley Kang, like, who is over in the LCK doing Horizon. Like, they all started at the same time as me, and their dedication for journalism is very strong. But at the same time, what I have a problem with how they've come about it is they've had to bend to someone constantly. No matter what it is, they've had to bend to some higher power constantly, and mostly due to the money factor, because journalism, you just don't get a whole lot of money when you're in this career, especially in esports, right? So with that said, they've had to bend to someone somehow, some way, because of some money dynamic. And that's what happens when you go all in on esports journalism, is that eventually you have to bend to someone's will because of the money factor and the aspect of survival when it comes to that type of industry. And you could even see, obviously, the exemplar example is Travis Gafford, right? He's clearly bent to a lot of the will of Riot Games and a lot of the will of certain esports teams and whatnot, and taking some things that he probably shouldn't have in his position when it comes to being within the esports industry. Even just as an interviewer, I won't even call him a journalist, just as an interviewer or someone that is a content creator within the space. And so with that, when you go all in, that means you then have less chips on the table when it comes to negotiation about how much money you're willing to take from this avenue or that avenue or whatnot, right? Versus, someone like me that has my foot in the door half in and half out. I don't need to make any money in esports at all. Like, I could do all of the things that I'm doing for free. Don't tell my editor and my publication about that. But the point is that I don't need any fucking money from esports at all. I could survive on my own without any of that shit, which then means that I can publish anything that I fucking want. I could be blackballed out the industry. I could produce any fucking work possible, and it doesn't really fucking matter to me, because at the end of the day, like, I don't need to make any money. I don't need to continue my tenureship within esports, whatever. It's just very ambiguous and very nebulous when it comes to whatever content that I can produce. And I can talk shit about any player or any team that I want. And if you deny me interviews or whatever, doesn't fucking matter, right? Because I don't need that money. I don't need that income. I'll just talk to someone else, if so be it, right? And so I think with that said, when you're thinking about going into esports itself and like concentrating on journalism, and I'm seeing all these other journalists kind of go into that flow and whatnot, is that they're still restricted. Whether they like to admit it or not, they are restricted in terms of what they can say and what they cannot say. And so therefore, that's something you need to think about when you try and get into that entire industry full time. And I actually recommend that you kind of don't, right? You have a day job, you have something else that you could focus on. Now, that is going to compromise your ability to cover the entire scene of whatever esports that you're covering, whether that be Valorant or CSGO or League of Legends, whatever. Sure, that's gonna hamper your aspect in order to cover those specific esports. And yes, sure, those other people that are going to cover those different aspects are going to have the leg up on you in terms of just the amount of output and the amount of coverage that they can do. But when it comes to the specific stories that you might be able to cover in terms of opinion pieces and whatnot, or things that you can say, you'll have the utmost liberty. You won't have to think about what you're actually trying to cover, which is, I think, the greatest amount of freedom when you don't go all in on esports, so to speak, right? And I think the whole aspect of the fundamental thing that comes to this is the diversification of income, right? It's just like, like you got to, just like the stock people say, you got to diversify your portfolio, homie. You know what I mean? Like it's all about that. It actually is, because when it comes down to the fundamental thing, when you think of in our society, right? I'm gonna get a little abstract on you. When you think about the fundamental aspect of our society and how we determine the value of someone, most of the time it is actually monetary. That is something in which is in the back of all of our minds, and at least first world societies and whatnot, is that like, how much does this person make? What's their net worth, right? Like that's why you see oftentimes when you Google someone's famous name, it's just like it pops up like, one of the Google questions is just like, what's their net worth? And it's just like, like I wasn't even trying to Google that, but it's very apparent that people care about someone's net worth, right? And so when you think about that and you think about the power of exactly how money incorporates, especially within esports journalism, you think about that and how that can hold over you in terms of what stories you can produce, or, how much you can put your foothold within that industry. And then when you think about that and how you can diversify your income to where you aren't so stranglehold in that particular industry to where they fucking have you by the balls, right? Then if they don't have you by the balls, like, they can do nothing to you at that point. The entire income aspect is completely null and void, which is generally how people have you by the balls to begin with in the first place in this modern day and age. And so, it's just like the whole Wu-Tang song, like, right? Like, cash rules everything around me, right? Like, that's exactly it. So in that aspect, you have to think, if you go all in, that's exactly the predicament that you're putting yourself in when it comes to this entire industry, right? But with that said, if you are willing to go all in, you should go all in while you're young, right? Because you have the backfall to go onto your parents, right? And yeah, sure, it puts the burden onto your parents or whatnot, but they're kind of expecting that anyways, right? And so that means that you have this kind of a cushion in order to, if you fail, then, you're able to kind of backtrack and do whatever you need to do, whether that be going back into college or, going back into the workforce or whatnot. Usually parents give you some parachute in order to fall back on as far as failure. And I think that is something that a lot of parents would like to provide their children is the ability to fail. That's one of the best things I think that you can provide for a child. And with that said, though, some people don't have the ability to fail, right? Like maybe your parents are poor, and so you don't really have that option to fail a whole lot. And so you can't take a whole lot of risks. Or if you do take that risk, it's like you might actually be fucked if you do take that, right? Like I was kind of in that position when I moved over to LA. It was all my dollar. It was nothing about my parents or whatnot. So I couldn't fall back on my parents if I actually failed moving to California and, getting into the LCS and doing interviews and whatnot. Although I never depended upon the LCS to make money. I never depended upon these interviews to make money. I had lined up a job before I got here in order to move here to then, if the whole LCS thing goes bust, that's fine. I just, make my life in LA and I work in LA and whatnot. And I make a career here, and then I expand from out, and maybe I go back home, maybe I don't, whatnot. But I always had a fucking backup plan, which is very important. Now, if you do decide to go all in, hold yourself accountable for adhering to going all in. And so this is part of something that I had tried to do quite a lot, in fact, in reminding myself that the reason why I moved down here in LA, next to the LCS studio, was because it was just like, I want to try and, make something of myself within the esports industry. I want to try and do these great interviews. I want to do these great opinion pieces, and eventually I want to try and go full time in esports, possibly, if I can, right? And so if you're planning to go all in on esports, hold yourself accountable. Do the day-to-day processes that you need to do in order to accomplish that. 1 hour a day of writing your opinion piece, and then 2 hours a day trying to transcribe your interviews and whatnot that you did during the LCS week or whatever. So there needs to be some type of accountability in order to progress yourself further within this type of industry, because everyone else is trying to hunt for that top spot anyways. And there are only so many people that can actually get up to that top position, because guess what? It's a talent industry, right? Esports journalism is a talent industry, no matter what people may think as though it's so subjective or so scientific or whatnot. It is very, very cutthroat in that sense. So overall, I actually don't recommend trying to go all in on esports journalism or esports writing or interviewing, etc. Most likely, let's just break it down. Let's just be honest. You're probably not good enough to make a great living off the industry. And in fact, if you're satisfied with living off a meager salary, then okay, maybe you could do that. But you probably aren't actually going to be one of the top people in terms of making, $80,000 a year in the esports journalistic industry. It's probably not what's going to happen for you. And so at least once you get that out of your head, then you can determine on if you actually want to join this industry. If what you're aiming for isn't necessarily about money or isn't about status, because let's face it also, journalists don't get status either, right? So it's not like one or the other, right? Of just like, oh, I could get money or I could get status. No, you get neither in esports journalism. And in fact, you get ridiculed, and oftentimes you get berated because of, especially if you're an investigative journalist, you get berated because you're breaking the story that maybe this favorite team or whatnot doesn't want you to break, or maybe this certain organization or these fans don't want you to break, and you're tearing down their star player or whatever the fuck. It's a very thankless job. So you don't even get both of those things. You don't get the money or the fame. You don't get any of that, in fact. you just get maybe the satisfaction that you're upholding a higher morality or ethics of the entire community. And that is probably your only sustenance when it comes to that entire industry. And I'm not even like fully into that shit, right? I just know from the outskirts looking in and being on like the borderline of it to actually realize this and see exactly what's going on, and the fact that you don't actually make a lot of money in this industry. I just want to reiterate that you will not make any fucking money if you go into this industry. And you're going to be the 1% if you do actually make a whole lot of money in this industry, which, by the way, then that trickles down of just like, well, what are the chances of even getting into this industry and getting paid a modicum or a decent amount of money? That's actually very rare. I wouldn't even consider myself in that realm of people, but maybe I am, maybe I haven't. I don't know other people's salaries or whatnot. But I think the closest comparison that I would look at would be DK, which, he's over in the Counter-Strike scene, which he was an investigative journalist before, but now I believe he's a player agent, discussing player contracts and whatnot. But I look at him as someone similar in the industry in terms of myself, in that he had a well-paying job. I think he was like, I want to say he was something ridiculous, he was like a computer engineer or something like that, making, obviously like 70 grand a year or higher or something. And he gave all that up in order to go into investigative journalism and whatnot. And that's great, but he gave himself that cushion, right? He gave himself that cushion of having that extra money in order to go into this different avenue of esports journalism, because he obviously knew that doesn't pay a whole lot, but that's his calling. And so if you do have this type of calling, I guess I can't stop you in doing it, right? Because that is your calling in and of itself. And no matter what I say, you're going to do it anyways. But with that said, at least try and have the idea that you need to have this cushion and this barrier in order to make yourself successful. That's the only thing that I would say. And also, I would say go and check out Richard Lewis's video of, I believe it's titled, "So You Want to Be an Esports Journalist." I'll link that down in the description below. But I thought this was very fitting in terms of doing this video for my 200th Inclination. Even though I'm not a journalist and I've never proclaimed to be, I've thought about going in that field quite hardcore. And I think there are a lot of traps and a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into if you're younger, especially. So I just want to give credence to that entire idea.